The lesson today is to be able to compare and order integers and absolute value. The following numbers are integers: -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, and 3. Integers are the set of whole numbers. Whole numbers are 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. Your whole numbers are 0 and all of the positive numbers to the right of 0. Integers are the set of whole numbers and their opposites. So the set of whole numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on, their opposites are -1, -2, -3. Integers are the set of whole numbers and their opposites. Integers do not include fractions and decimals. All right. Second vocabulary term, absolute value. The absolute value of an integer is the distance between the number and 0 on a number line. The absolute value of a number is written using these symbols here. If I'm looking for the absolute value of -4, I'm being asked, well, how far is -4 from 0? Well, -4 is 4 units from 0. So the absolute value of -4 is 4. The absolute value of 4, you're being asked, well, how far is 4 from 0? Well, the value of 4 is 4 units to the right of 0. Right? So the absolute value of 4 is also 4. The absolute value is an integer's distance from 0. Right? Next page. Well, if we want to find the absolute value of 2, we're being asked, well, how far is 2 from 0? The value of 2 is 2 units from 0. So the absolute value of 2 is going to be 2. All right? And we would write it this way. The absolute value of 2 is equal to 2. Next example, we're asking for the absolute value of -3. We would write it this way, using the symbols for absolute value. The absolute value of -3, you're being asked, how far is -3 from 0? Well, -3 is 3 units to the left of 0. So the absolute value of -3 is going to be equal to 3. All right, if we look at these examples here, if we're asked to find the absolute value of 7, we're being asked, how far is 7 from 0? Well, 7 is 7 units from 0. So the absolute value of 7 is 7. The absolute value of -1, you're being asked, how far is -1 from 0? Well, -1 is 1 unit from 0. So the absolute value of -1 is 1. The absolute value of -5. Well, how far is -5 from 0? Well, -5 is 5 units from 0. So the absolute value of -5 is 5. And finally, the absolute value of 14. Well, how far is 14 from 0? Well, it's 14 units from 0. So the absolute value of 14 is 14. If I'm asked to compare numbers, if I'm asked to compare 1 and the absolute value of -4, a number line is very helpful in doing that comparison. Well, the value of 1 is 1 unit to the right of 0. The absolute value of -4, right, which we know is 4, well, that's 4 units to the right of 0. So if I'm being asked to compare 1 with the absolute value of -4, right, it would look something like this. 1 is going to be less than the absolute value of -4 because 1 is to the left of 4 on the number line. If we're looking at these examples here, you want to think about that number line each time you compare these numbers. The absolute value of -2, well, that's located 2 units to the right of 0. -1 is to the left of 0. So the absolute value of -2, which is 2, that's going to be greater than -1. -7 is to the left of 0. The absolute value of 6, well, the absolute value of 6 is 6. That's to the right of 0. -7 then would be less than +6. Very often my students like to say, well, Mr. Pilata, is absolute value always going to be positive? And the answer to that is yes. The absolute value of a number will always be a positive value because absolute value is a measurement of distance, and distance is always going to be written using a positive value. Here we have the absolute value of 10, which is 10. Well, 10 is less than 11. Here I have 9 and the absolute value of negative 9. Well, the absolute value of negative 9 we know is 9, so 9 would be equal to the absolute value of negative 9. Here we're given a little chart looking at different substances and their freezing points. The freezing point is the temperature at which a liquid becomes a solid. Question A asks, which substance in the table has the lowest freezing point? Well, a very useful method to compare that we can use to compare these values would be a number line. So if we're locating each of these on a number line, right, I always have to start with 0. So I'm going to put 0 here. I know that the furthest left of 0 is going to be negative 53. That's going to be furthest left of 0. Then negative 39, right? And then negative 3 is going to be closer to 0, but still to the left of 0. 35 is going to be to the right of 0, and 55 is going to be even further right of 0. Once I list those values along a number line, then it's pretty easy to see which has the lowest freezing point. The lowest freezing point is going to be the value that is furthest left of 0, and the value furthest left from 0, that's going to be airplane fuel. So for question A, airplane fuel would have the lowest freezing point. Let's look at question B. Question B says, is the freezing point of mercury or butter closer to the freezing point of water? Well, if the freezing point of water is 0, we can use the absolute values of the freezing point of mercury and the freezing point of butter to determine which is going to be closest to 0. Well, mercury has an absolute value, right, of 39. Butter, let's see, butter has an absolute value of what? Well, the freezing point of butter is 35. The absolute value of 35 is 35. Well, if we're using the absolute values to compare, mercury is 39 units from 0 because the absolute value of a number is the integer's distance from 0. The absolute value of 35 is 35 units from 0. So which one of these is closer? Right, butter would be closer to 0. Right, closer to 0. All right. The on your own question asks, is the freezing point of airplane fuel or candle wax closer to the freezing point of water? Well, once again, the freezing point of water is 0, so we can use the absolute values of these numbers to compare. Airplane fuel is negative 53 degrees, right? That's its freezing point, so the absolute value of negative 53 is going to be 53 units. All right, candle wax, let's see, where's my candle wax? Candle wax, right, that has a freezing point of 55 degrees. The absolute value of 55 is going to be 55. So which is closer to the freezing point of water? Well, the freezing point of water is 0, so which of these is closer to 0? Right, 53 is closer to 0, so airplane fuel would be the value that is closer to the freezing point of water. All right, let's take a look at some other examples here. Let's look at example 5. We want to take the absolute value of negative 5 and we want to take away the absolute value of 2. Well, first we have to evaluate their absolute values. The absolute value of negative 5 is 5. The absolute value of 2 is 2. 5 take away 2. Oops. 5 take away 2. That's going to be 3. So the absolute value of negative 5 take away the absolute value of 2 is going to be 3. Let's take a look at each one of these examples. The absolute value of 8 how far is 8 from 0? Absolute value measures the integer's distance from 0, so the absolute value of 8 is going to be 8. If I want to evaluate the expression 2 plus the absolute value of negative 3, well, first I have to evaluate that absolute value. So I recopy the 2 and the plus sign. But the absolute value of negative 3 is going to be 3. 2 plus 3, that's going to be 5. Here I have the absolute value of negative 6, which is 6. So we want to take 5 away from that. That's going to give us positive 1. All right. And we're going to end our lesson there. Hopefully that was helpful for you guys, and we'll see you next time.